In the previous video, we talked about how to take a simple pen and create material thickness, creating this wooden pencil with a painted outside and creating a lead that looks more realistic. In this video, we're going to talk more about how to take an object and set up some lights and make it look just better with some better shaders, some textures, and just take an object to the next level in terms of rendering it. The first thing I want to talk about is plugins. So Rhino has a lot of different plugins. One of the best ones for shading and just setting up your object is this plugin here called Neon. So Neon creates this thing within the display where it creates a ray traced with neon option. And so within the display mode, you have this option, and when you click on it, it renders everything as the regular rendering engine does, but it does it in a live, more dynamic way, right? Like as you're moving, it's rendering. So it's almost like a preview, but it's not really a preview. It's literally rendering the object with the light, with whatever settings you have. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that this rendering plugin, or this ray tracing plugin, is not the same ray tracing engine as the default Rhino ray tracing engine. So sometimes what you see here is not going to look exactly the same as what you see when you click the render button. So it's something to keep in mind. Sometimes the textures don't show up the same way, sometimes the colors are not exactly the same. It mostly depends on the type of lighting you're using and the different shaders and how they react to your light or the reflections and details like these. So let's jump into it. We have this pen. We want to assign different materials. The first thing I would do, set up a scene. So what I mean by a scene is we're going to need some kind of floor and we're going to need some lights, maybe some environment. For example, if the paint was reflective, if you have a nice environment, you might catch some of the reflections onto your pen, so it makes everything more realistic. So, step number one, you definitely need some kind of ground, something where your object sits on. Now, this can be a whole desk, it can be anything you want. It can be a pencil holder or anything. So I'm going to take the object and I'm going to make sure it sits onto this plane. I'm going to make it much larger than it needs to be. So I can click anywhere and just make it big. It doesn't matter how much bigger, just make it big enough that when you're looking at the object, you're not seeing the edge of that plane. You're looking down at the object. Because that's the type of scene I'm thinking of setting up right now. I think it's one of the easiest ways to set up an object, and in this software it makes everything look better in general, because if you have a white background it looks like it's just floating in space. So yeah, that's one of the easiest ways to render an object. Now the second thing I'm going to do is set up my layer and kind of organize them. So this would be the floor or the ground, you can call it whatever you want as long as it's easy to remember. And you can assign a color or you can keep it as it is. I'm going to make it a dark blue and I'm going to make sure that the selected object is assigned to the floor. Okay. Now the next step for me typically is to organize the layers. So curves, because this is part of a construction, I would set it as one of the first objects. Default, I don't want anything in default, so I'm just going to hide it. And now I have all of the parts I'm going to use to render the object, the lead, the wooden part, and the paint. And the floor we've already set up. So now whenever you assign a material, you're going to assign a material based on the layer. Now one thing to note is there's a whole workflow to this. We first created the object, then we refined the details and how we want them to render, creating thicknesses. And the last step, which is the step we're doing right now, is organizing the layers and assigning materials. You don't want to start creating material thickness and organizing your materials before you've completed creating the basic object. because if you do and you choose to change part of your design, for example, make this more round or more square, or maybe you want this to be some kind of cones, a different shape, whatever it is you want to do, if you want to do it at this stage, it's extremely painful for you to go back and redo pretty much the entire project. So you have to think of it as a linear workflow. You start with the solid object, you refine it, you assign the different parts into layers, and then you render it. If you want to go back, it's going to be a lot more time consuming, and honestly you might as well just start from scratch because it's going to take so much time. So anyway, let's move forwards. Just wanted you to be aware of how to walk through this thing, but let's assign some materials and just move forwards with rendering everything. So the first thing we're going to do is select this paint, and whatever is within the paint layer, we're going to create a material for it. So we're going to click on material. Within this layer, we're going to create an object. So the entire layers that's selected right now is going to become a new shader, a new material. And we can create a new one, something that's not default. So this pops up and tells you what is it you want to do. Do you want to create something white matte, or do you want to use one of the other default presets? Most of the time I wouldn't use one of these presets. I would just go down here, and then it gives you this menu that lets you select what kind of shading properties you would like. Do you want something that's a blended material or a basic material? For this class, I would suggest just use basic materials, and you should get pretty good results with basic materials. You don't have to go too deep into the composite or the blended materials. Typically, you would use composite when you have something that's translucent, transparent, you can see through it, but behind it you have something else. So if you want to use a single solid or a single plane and you want it to have kind of multiple layers to it, then you would use a composite material to do that. And usually a composite material actually relies on multiple basic materials. So for now, just use the basic material. You'll get good results with that anyway. It gives you a really good start. And then if you want to get even better results, maybe consider going into the composite. So let's jump into it and start assigning a color. For the color of this object, we're going to make it some kind of yellowish tone. We probably don't want it to be so bright, so let's lower it and maybe make it less saturated. So this relates to the saturation up here, and then it can be darkened or lightened. And you have everything in between where it's less saturated at the center. So anyway, just pick a color that you think is good for this type of object. And then you can go deeper into the properties, choose how glossy you want it. Maybe we do want it to be more glossy rather than matte. Reflectivity, maybe it's kind of reflective, but not too much because it is a paint. Transparency, it's not going to be transparent. And that's it. So for this one, that's basically all we need. So that's our first layer, our first shader for this material. Now the lead, I think that's going to be pretty easy. We can select the lead, go back to the same menu, assign a material, and within the material, go to the object and assign the selected object a different color. So for this color, I guess we're going to use something more like in the brownish colors. And this should be good, that's it. Okay. Do we want it to be gloss? Sure. Reflective? Not really. So gloss is the way it catches the light. Reflectivity is more like, is it chrome? Does it reflect like a mirror? Or not so much? But if it's matte, then the light is going to be very soft on it, like something like rubber, something like a tire of a car. It's not going to be very glossy, it's not going to have much gloss. But at the same time, if it's polished, a polished tire could be very glossy but not reflective. So it just relates to the property, how much texture does the tire have, or how soft it is, or if someone polished it. So it refers to this kind of property of how the light hits the object. So for now we're going to keep the lead as kind of glossy but not super glossy and no reflection. And the last material we want to work with is this one. So let's go back to the layers and we're going to go to the wood. I forgot if you can select, can you select objects within? Yeah, select objects. So if you do a right click on wood, you can select the objects within a layer. So this makes it very easy to select anything that has the same material. And then go back here again using a material and assign a material to whatever is selected. Again, we're going to change the color. This is wood, so we'll make it some kind of brownish color again. And for now, we'll leave it at that. It's not glossy, it's not reflective, it's fine. Okay, so let's get a sense of what we're looking at. Go under display, and you can use the ray trace with neon. Now, this is going to give you a good idea of what you're looking at, but if you don't have this plugin, it's okay. You can just go under the render, you can click here, render, or you can do a render preview, or you can just click on the button itself. You can click here. Now, I've made some changes to the settings, so maybe I should kind of show you a few settings. It looks okay. The LED is a bit light, everything else looks okay. So yeah, going back to the settings, you can click here, options, and at the top here you have two settings. One is rendering, and this I wouldn't touch. You can use linear workflow if you want, but honestly it doesn't matter. It just says that the gamma is going to stay 1, okay, whatever. Then you have a safe frame. Again, I wouldn't touch anything here. The one that you want to click on is this one, Rhino Render, and here you can set up the resolution you want to use. The default resolution I would recommend using would be 1920 by 1080. This is what you're going to be seeing when you watch a YouTube video. Probably this one has a setting, and it's going to give you the option to go from 720, which would be 1280 by 720, or this one, 1920 by 1080. So I would recommend making all of your renderings 1920 by 1080. Now for the anti-alias, this depends on your computer. Some computers are really fast, really powerful, they have a good CPU, just good hardware. So you might be able to crank it up to 10, maybe not. I'm going to leave it at 2 for this one because it's just a quick demo. What's most important here would be the resolution and the anti-alias. So if you want the best possible rendering, you can make the resolution bigger and make the anti-alias bigger. For now, we want it to render quickly, so normal with 2 times anti-aliasing is better. It just refers to the quality of how many passes the rendering software does, how many times does it go over the object to get the best possible results. Okay, moving on. So we should probably talk about lighting. So let's go back to the shaded view. We're gonna change the material for this guy here. So we go under properties, materials, and we're changing the color, make it darker, and this should do the job. We can also make this slightly brighter. Okay. But I think this should be completely fine. We don't have to worry too much about anything else. Oh, it looks like I forgot to assign a material to the ground, so I'm going to go in, assign a material to this object, and change the color. Usually you do not want it to be white, you want it to be off-white, because this way it can gradiate from being white to something darker. So it gives it a better effect of gradiating from where the light is and where the light is less present. So now let's talk about the lights. For the lights, there's a few different types. Typically, I would go up here, look for the Render Tools tab, and within this tool, you're going to have these presets up here. Now, another way to access the same tools would be under Standard. You're going to have a light create spotlight. So you have this tool up here, and if you click on the triangle at the bottom right of the icon, it's going to have this drop down, and you're going to have the same exact lights, and you can actually pull them out of the menu. And by the way, you can do this with any of your tools. You can click here, take the whole tool, drag it out. So you can drag menus out of your basic interface to change the way it looks, or create your own custom panels if you want to. But yeah, let's not talk about that right now. Let's not get sidetracked too much. So I just want to show you that you can actually get these light settings from the standard menu. If you don't have the render tools for some reason, or if you just prefer using only the standard, you can access them here. You can even access them under the render, create spotlight, point light, and this is the same order here. Direction light is the third one. So they're actually set up the same way in all of the menus, the same order from left to right, and from top to lower down on the menu. So for a simple object like that, I would just set up two things. I would set up a spotlight because it's easy to adjust the direction, and I would set up something like a directional light, or this one, a rectangular light. In this case, I think the rectangular light is going to be easier to control, so I'll just go in, set something up. It looks like it's upside down because the arrow is facing up. So I'm going to move this up, and I'm going to rotate the entire light by 180 degrees. So I'm holding Shift, going 180, and this is basically the sunlight. Now there's a bunch of settings here. The first thing I typically do when I set up a light is lower the intensity, because 100 is the maximum, and you never want to start with the maximum intensity because otherwise you can't really increase it. So it's ideal to start with something less than the maximum. Shadow intensity, yeah, we can make it really soft. Now for the second one, we're going to use a spotlight. Ideally, you would want to create 3 different lights. You would have this main light, which just creates, basically your entire scene would be lit up by this single light. And this single light would be very large, so you would scale it. You would scale it to be much, much bigger. And then you would set up your spotlight, which is your key light, the main one that you're going to be using. And then you would use other lights like fill lights, lights that help see the object better, and maybe they light the back of the object because it gets too dark. So most of the time you would use a bare minimum of 3 lights. In many cases you're going to use 4 lights because you have your basic environment light, you have your main light, and then you might want 2 of them, maybe because you want light underneath the object, maybe you want more control from the front or the side or the back. So it's normal to have more than 2 or 3 lights. You can have as many lights as you want. It just becomes kind of difficult to control the intensity once you have too many of them. So 3 lights is kind of an ideal number, especially if you have your main light and then 2 additional lights. So it's just something to keep in mind. You don't want to have too many lights where it becomes too difficult for you to kind of control the results that you want to get. But at the same time, you want enough lights that it just lights up the object enough, and it just looks correct, it looks better. So for this one, we want the intensity of the shadow to be darker, and that should be it. So with 2 lights, we should already get some pretty good results. So let's see if a preview in ray trace with neon gives us good results, and if it doesn't, we can adjust things. If it did give us the perfect results that we're looking for, we could just go straight to the rendering, and it's going to give us our nice 1080 by 1920 resolution. And yeah, so far it's giving us really good results. So you can clearly see with 2 lights, you can get really good results. I'm going to make a few different tweaks, just adjustments to the lights. But you can already see that this is going to look pretty good. Yeah, it's cutting up the light here. So I'm going to go deeper into the setting up of light. And I'm going to accelerate the time of the video so I don't waste too much of your time. And I can talk about how I got to these results after after I go back to the normal speed of the video. Okay, so I'm happy with this result. It's just a better lighting situation than before, and I didn't do very much to this scene. The main thing I did was select this light and make it larger, and also change some of the intensities. The shadow intensity was changed as well, and this intensity here has been changed also. But it's mostly about manipulating these settings. In this scene, because there's only one object, I'm not going to mess with an additional light. But if you did wanted to set up an additional light, what I would recommend doing is change the shadow intensity to nothing. And this can help because otherwise you're going to have 3 or 4 shadows. It might create too many shadows. A rule here is if you have just like 2 objects, if you don't have many objects, then you should probably have a maximum of 2 shadows. If you have more than 2 shadows, it's just going to become kind of strange. It's going to create tangencies where the shadow meets the object, and it's just going to draw the attention to places where you don't want to draw your attention to. So just make sure that the shadow intensity is off if you have more than 2 lights. You only want 2 of your lights to have shadows, or maybe even 1 light. So just keep that in mind. Too many shadows is going to be disruptive to your renderings. So one last thing I wanted to talk about is maps. So we've created thicknesses which make everything look kind of nice and more realistic. But at the same time, this is supposed to be wood and it looks more like some kind of plastic part. So to create some wooden kind of texture, to give it the wooden feel, there's a few different ways to do it with maps, and so I wanted to go over it by kind of showing you the texture mapping properties. And so the way it works is there's many ways to use it. There's many different properties that you can use, but ultimately you just select the object you want to assign wood to, and so that's going to be this and that. Okay, these 2 objects. And we want the material to be this material we had created. And let's see, can we create a new one and make something even better? So there is actually some defaults right here for the wood. So we can try something like a walnut. Yeah, what about this? No, too much texture. So it's all about the grain. I'm just looking at the grain, not so much the colors. So cork is actually decent for something like this. Oh yeah, bamboo. Bamboo should give us exactly what we're looking for. So let's select bamboo and let's see what it gives us. Okay, let's see if we can get a preview. Okay, so it looks like the orientation of this texture is running the incorrect way. We want it to run the opposite way. So let's go under the properties and let's look at what they're doing. So for the color, they're actually using basically nothing. Huh. That's strange. Yeah, it seems to me like they're using a texture. But so in most cases, yeah, it says it's using a texture because there is a texture down here. Let's see. Yeah, so the way it's set up is the color is assigned down here. So if you remove this, you have no color, it's set to white. But if you want to assign a map, you would go up here. And if you reduce the intensity of it, it goes in between the map and the color, which is white in this case. So for now, we want it to be exactly 100%. We want to use only the texture. We can go up here and we can kind of change the orientation of this map. If you're not sure where the map is found, you can go up here And you can even look for other maps. So you can copy this, you can go down to your Explorer, and let's copy this. And here it is, that's the map. But so my point here is that if you wanted to find where this folder is located, you can just copy it straight from this, this texture location. And then when you copy the entire location, you can remove the image that's selected and just go straight to this location where the texture was found. One reason why you might want to do that is to open this image and maybe you want to change the color, maybe you want it to be lighter, maybe you want it to be blue instead of orange, I don't know. Yeah, you can do whatever you want, you know, you can open it in Photoshop or Paint and modify these images for whatever project you're working on. I had to do a felt once, and so for the felt I had to go in Photoshop and use existing colors, existing swatches and existing patterns and take pictures of actual felt and kind of create my own texture because there was nothing out there that looked correct. So just keep that in mind. Sometimes you have to do your own texture or modify an existing texture, and you can also go online and find other wooden images or pictures, whatever you need. So here it says it repeats 2 and 2, and you can also change that. Instead of changing the image, you can also change the size of the image and how it relates to the object. Now, nothing is happening aesthetically in the image. But if I accept the changes, if I press OK, everything is going to update. Now, if we wanted to rotate the image, we can do it here within rotate. So I'm going to make a rotation of exactly 90 degrees, so it's going to run with the object instead of this orientation. So now if I press OK, the map is going to be reversed, and it looks like it's being kind of pulled this way. So if I want to change that, I'm going to have to go back to the bitmap again. So again, click under color bitmap, and your prompt this texture here. You can go down here and you can change the proportion. So if I say 2 to 1, or maybe even, there is this button I forgot to mention. Here you can link. So if you say 4 and it's not linked, it's 4 to 2. But if it's linked and you say, let's say 3, now they both, they keep the same aspect ratio to each other. So sometimes you have to click on it if you don't want to keep the same proportions to, you know, the X and Y axis, or the U and V because it relates to a surface in this case. So let's do a 2 to 1. Okay, and let's see how it changes. So it seems to make it even worse, which means we probably want it to be the opposite. So let's try 3 and 1 for the U orientation. Okay, and here it is. It looks much better. Now, sometimes when you zoom out, you can't really see the texture anymore. So it's sometimes a good idea to increase the size of the texture. It's not realistic when you think about it. Like making it twice as big would be way too much. So it's not realistic anymore. Oh, actually it's twice as small. Let's go back and make sure it's bigger. Oh, is it not scaling? Let's see. Offset. Yeah, it's not going to be scaling at all. 0.56. Oh yeah, it does. Sometimes it doesn't scale because it's based on the size of your surface, but it seems like this is not the case. So for this texture, it seems to be able to zoom in and zoom out. But so as you can see, if you're very close to it, it doesn't really seem correct. It seems like the texture is too large, but you're never going to look at this pen so close. So when you're looking at it from a distance, I think it looks very nice. So I would keep it this way. And I think that's it. I'm just going to do a quick rendering to show you how nice it can work. I mean, how nice it can look. And one last thing I'm going to do before I create this rendering is set up the environment. Now, you don't have to worry about the environment at this point, but later on, if you're doing something that's very reflective, it might make a big difference. So to make an environment, you go under Render, and under render you should be able to find this environment editor. So in this case we just have a solid image, so nothing basically, it's just a solid color that does nothing, and we want to change it to an environment. And so this kind of creates a map, an overall map around the object, that anything that reflects, that has any of the reflection properties within the material, it's going to catch that map. So that map is going to reflect within any reflective object. So you can use a blank environment, or you can go under More Types. So I would click on More Types, create a basic environment, or just click here. They both do the same. You can assign a name, so we can call it environment 1. Okay, and then we can change the color, but we don't want a color in this case, we want a background image. So we can go under the image, go under More Types. I'll show you that again. You go under background image, click on empty, click to assign, go under More Types, and now you have a bunch of different options. Within these options you can select this one here, High Definition Range Texture. We call it HDR image. So click on this, and this lets you select an HDR. So again, HDR is a high definition or high dynamic range image. So select one of these images, and it's going to create an environment for your scene and for your object within the scene. Some of these images you can find online. If you go to the topic with all of the assets, you're going to find a whole zip folder that contains a bunch of them. So just empty the zip into a new folder, and then you'll have a bunch of HDRs that you can use for this class. And then you can just select one of these guys, assign it, and you can already see what it looks like. And maybe I should show you an example of exactly what it does, but for now I'll just set up a quick rendering just to get a sense of how nicely it's reflecting, or if it's not reflecting enough. And then I can show you a quick example of why you would want this environment to be an actual image as opposed to just keeping it white. Yeah, so here it is. It still looks pretty good like it did before. But now if I set up something like a sphere, okay, and if I assign a new material to this sphere, making it an object, and the object would be something, I don't know, let's go under the metals. Do we have any metals here? Yeah. Let's make it silver. Okay, so now we have something silver. It has, it should have more gloss. You can already see with the neon ray tracer, you can see it's reflecting a lot. So what I wanted to show you here is that if you have a reflective object, it's going to make your object look so much better. So again, if I render it, now you can see that not only the sphere is going to be reflective, but the pen is going to reflect inside this sphere. And so this is how you make really nice renderings in Rhino. You would set up an environment so that the environment reflects onto your object, and then if you have multiple objects, it makes each of your objects reflect within each other, and it just makes everything look so much more realistic. Now, one last thing I wanted to do is change this pen material and make it very reflective. And you can see how using this neon plugin can really help, because you can see the reflections inside your object without actually having to render anything out. So again, I would highly recommend that you do get the ray traced with neon plugin. And again, this plugin has been saved, and I gave you a link to this specific plugin within the assets folder I created. So I hope this was a helpful video and that you learned a lot that you're going to be able to apply in your own renderings. Just don't get too caught up with all the lights and reflections, because I know that in this class you always want to build something and you want to see it like a nice realistic image. You want to see it as if it was in real life, but just don't spend all of your time trying to create a nice picture, because honestly this class is not about creating nice images. It's more about you understanding the software, being able to create nice objects that have nice material thickness, and just try to make them realistic, but at the same time you don't have to spend too much time assigning the perfect color, the perfect finish, the best reflections, the best environment. Don't get too sucked into this rendering aspect of the software, because in most cases I wouldn't even recommend using Rhino as the rendering engine. I would actually recommend you use something like Keyshot, because it's just much quicker to get better results. So just keep in mind, this class is a modeling class, and I don't want you to spend too much time in creating nice images. It's all about you creating nice objects. Whether you can render it super nicely or not, that's not as important. But yeah, so I hope you enjoyed this video and that you can apply some of what you learned in some of your upcoming projects for this class.